some very strong evidence that radically contradicts the current Orthodox view of history. In short, through a 5-book series, he demonstrates that the Jewish patriarchs were actually pharaohs of Lower Egypt, or members of those royal families. He shows how the Jewish monotheistic religion grew from a schism between the Egyptian religions in Upper and Lower Egypt. Then he explores the Christian religion, originally a sect of the Jewish religion, and how it was hijacked and radically changed in the 1st century by Saul or Paul. The proof Ralph Ellis offers in his startling discoveries arises from comparisons he found in multiple accounts of history, historical people and events. He carefully compared the accounts of the Jewish Tanakh, the Quran, the Kebra Nagas, which is the sacred writings of Ethiopia, and the writings of Josephus and Manetho. Actually, Manetho, an Egyptian historian, all of his writings have been lost, except that Josephus quotes him so often that his writings were preserved through the writings of Josephus. So pretty interesting. When these religious and secular histories agree with each other, Ralph Ellis assumes that those items can be considered to be dependable historical facts, and I have to agree with that. His first book in the series is Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs. There's the book. It gives a historical overview of the whole series of this 5-book series. Let us begin with this brief exploration with the patriarch Abraham. In my own childhood experience, I can remember Sunday school characterizing Abraham as a hospitality to angels and was rewarded with a promise from God that he would father a great nation, even though he and his wife were old and barren. His faith was accounted as righteousness. Now let us take a closer look at what the Bible really says. Genesis 13 begins with, "And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold." Then in Genesis 14, there's an account of a great battle in Sodom and Gomorrah. Abram's nephew Lot, who lived in Sodom, was taken captive. Abram and his 318 soldiers defeated the retiring attackers and rescued Lot in a nighttime raid. Melchizedek, the priest king of Salem, gave Abram his soldiers bread and wine, and he blessed them. Abram gave Melchizedek a tithe, that's a tenth, of the spoils of battle. And the king of Sodom told Abram, "Give me the persons, take all the goods for yourself." Now, does this sound like a poor nomadic shepherd? I don't think so. Josephus wrote, in the 10th generation after the flood, there was among the Chaldeans a man of righteousness and great, Abraham, skillful in the celestial sciences. Discourse with the Egyptians, that he communicated to them arithmetic and delivered to them the science of astronomy. For before Abraham came to Egypt, they were unacquainted with those parts of learning. Again, does that sound like a simple herder of sheep? The Hyksos priesthood in the lower Egypt, Nile Delta area, were celestial scientists based in the sacred city of Heliopolis, or the city of the sun, which is also sacred to the Jewish religion. The people of Upper Egypt, or the southern part of Egypt, had worshipped the Apis bull for thousands of years, as far back as 3500 BC, about 2,000 years before the era of Abraham. The word Apis means in the image of the sun. and the Apis bull was illustrated as a bull with a sun disk between his horns. The astronomers at Heliopolis would observe the sunrise each day. Of particular interest was the sunrise at the vernal equinox, where this was the start of spring and the birth of the beginning of a new year. The eras were accounted by observing the constellation whose position toward arose. This would have been the constellation of Taurus around 3500 BC. In the time of Abraham, the priest of Heliopolis observed that the vernal equinox heliacal rising was in the constellation of Aries, the sheep, not Taurus, the bull. This is due to the wobble of the Earth's pole, termed precession. The Heliopolitan priest demanded the religion change, but the upper Egyptian populace, whose religion was centered at Thebes, was outraged. They said, "We've always done it that way." Ever hear that before? Apparently, the priests at Thebes were not acquainted with the science of the lower Egyptians in the Nile Delta. The inevitable split between North and South came when Upper Egypt declared the Northerners in the Delta to be heretics, and the Lower Egypt be that would be the Southerners, the uneducated plebeians. The Northerners in the Delta crowned their own pharaoh, a Hyksos pharaoh, a follower of the Lamb, a shepherd king. This split eventually led to civil war. This is probably the origin of the phrase separating the sheep from the cattle. Ellis goes on to speculate that Abraham was the first Hyksos shepherd pharaoh of Lower Egypt, whose throne name was Sheshi, but his common name was Meabra or Abramam, depending on the order of the glyphs made in his name by the scribes. The son of Sheshi, Abraham, was Anather, Isaac, and his son was Jacob, whose throne name was Jacoba or Jacoba. Jacob had a brother Esau, who should have been the heir, and he was outmaneuvered by his brother Jacob. This led to the first great exodus from Egypt. Ellis claims that the biblical account is a confusion or combination of two separate exoduses. The volcano at Thera, that's the modern Greek city or Greek island of Santorini, erupted, which brought on the biblical plagues. The people, including Lower Egypt, began to worry that God was unhappy and began to doubt their religion. And many began to turn to Esau and the old familiar religion, that of the Taurus bull. As his army grew, Jacob sent word to his faithful followers to display the blood of a lamb on their front doors to identify themselves as followers of Aries, so that the soldiers would pass by their house. Ellis slightly modifies the biblical account of the Passover. This is Ellis's interpretation. For on the 14th day of this month, I, God, shall order my troops, that's his change, to kill all the firstborn of the cattle, that's the children who believe in Taurus. Then you shall borrow, that is loot, all of their property, taking gold, silver, and precious jewels, and you will spoil, that means loot everything that belongs to, the Egyptians who worship Taurus. The Aryans were forced to retreat to the Nile Delta and built a fortress. Esau laid siege to force a surrender, but finally gave up, and he made a treaty that all could depart Egypt unmolested with their possessions and with the wealth that they had looted from Lower Egypt. Esau visited Avaris. This was a fortified city. And seeing the devastation caused by their greed, he declared this deed should ever be called avarice. Because of the devastation caused by their greed, Esau changed his mind and chased the Hyksos, determined to teach them a lesson. But Jacob sent soldiers by night into Esau's camp and removed the locking pins on the wheels of the chariots. The next day, Jacob watched as his chariots attempted to cross the ford of the Nile River in the Delta area, and the wheels fell off the chariots as expected, making it look like the river had flooded and swallowed them up. Jacob, second to the youngest son, was Joseph. We all know the story of Jacob's favorite son with a coat of many colors being sold into slavery by his jealous elder brothers. But this story evokes too many questions to believe its credibility. Why would the second youngest son be the favorite? Wouldn't the eldest son be the one chosen to lead the family? The answer lies in the family lineage through Jacob's wives. Rachel was the chief wife of Jacob. In the Egyptian culture, the royal line flowed only through the chief wife. Joseph was not the eldest brother, but he was the eldest son of Rachel. Joseph was the chosen one to succeed Jacob as Pharaoh. Might Joseph have been sent to Lower Egypt to study at Heliopolis? It is known through the writings of Josephus that later in the 2nd century BC, Onias IV was a Jewish high priest who fled Israel because of the oppression of the Macedonians. He came to Alexandria and was so favorably received by Ptolemy that he was allowed to restore the temple at Heliopolis. This is additional proof of the direct link between the Jews and the priests of Heliopolis in Lower Egypt. Further, the name Onias must have been a hereditary title for the priest of Heliopolis, since the Bible refers to that as the city of On. It was the priest at Heliopolis, observing that the age of Taurus had passed and the age of Aries had begun. Onias is a fitting title for the chief priest of the city of On. This could explain that possibly Joseph was not actually sold into slavery by his brothers, but returned to Heliopolis or On to be educated and prepared to assume duties as a ruler of Lower Egypt. Or possibly his brothers hated him, not just because he was Jacob's favorite, but because of jealousy that their younger brother Joseph was heir of the royal bloodline. Further, Joseph married Asenath, the daughter of the high priest of On, to continue the royal bloodline. It is well documented that Joseph was vizier or ruler of Lower Egypt. The Hebrews who wrote the Pentateuch wanted to distance themselves from the Egyptians and made up a convenient story of how Joseph arrived in Lower Egypt as a slave and his miraculous rise to vizier in order to conceal his Egyptian origins. And this brings up an interesting question about Jesus' early years, those lost early years. The Gospels, except Mark, give the story of his birth, then jump to his adult ministry. The story of the murder of the holy innocents may be a convenient cover-up. Herod ordered all male children under the age of 2 be killed, ostensibly to remove the royal Jesus from taking over his kingdom. Certainly something of this magnitude would have been noticed and recorded. The Bible tells us that an angel appeared to Jesus' father, Joseph, telling him to take the family to Egypt. There could be another reason for Jesus traveling to Egypt. He was hailed as king of the lineage detailed in the Gospels. Might Jesus, like Joseph, son of Jacob, be making a journey to Egypt to be educated at On, Heliopolis? Was he being prepared to rule as had been the patriarchs before him? The Pharisees marveled at his knowledge and understanding. Does that sound like a simple son of a humble carpenter? Royalty traveling to Lower Egypt for training was a long and ancient tradition. Both Joseph and Jesus were heirs of the Hyksos, shepherd pharaohs, being descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Both were elder sons of the chief wife. Jesus was also called the Lamb of God. This fits perfectly with the knowledge of the priest at Heliopolis that the vernal equinox rising of the sun came into the constellation of Aries, the sheep, the ram. It is also interesting connection to the story of Abraham, who was about to sacrifice his son Isaac, who was saved by the ram getting caught his horns in a bush. They were providing a convenient substitute sacrifice for his son. The priest of Heliopolis would only sacrifice sheep. Remember that Jacob, prior to the great Exodus, ordered marking the doors of the houses of the faithful with the blood of the sheep, the followers of the Lamb. Joseph's family, being struck with severe famine in Israel, came to Lower Egypt to buy grain, and the whole family was reunited. Joseph persuaded Pharaoh to give land to his family that they might settle with him in Lower Egypt. This set up the circumstances for the smaller exodus which would follow. This exodus was well documented by Manetho, the Egyptian historian. This exodus was led by Moses and Aaron and was all about the differences in the religion between the north, Aries, and the south, Taurus. The time frame perfectly matches when Akhenaten was pharaoh of Lower Egypt, who with the aid of his brother Tutmosis forced the worship of only one deity, Aton, the sun god, doing away with the plethora of other gods of ancient Egypt. Just as before, with the forced change to the age of Aries, war broke out between North and South. Ellis speculates that Akhenaten, which was his throne name, was actually Aaron, the brother of Moses, whose Egyptian name was Tutmosis. Aaron was pharaoh of Lower Egypt, and his brother Moses was the high priest. There are some compelling similarities in history. First of all, the god of Akhenaten was called Aton, while the god of the Israelites was called Adon. Adonai. Akhenaten promoted a single god without an image, as did Moses. The Ark of the Covenant bears a close resemblance to the Ark of Tutankhamun, the son of Akhenaten. Israelites were commanded to make altars which were not hewn with any tool, with no steps leading up to it. The great altar at Karnak was made with nearly the same dimensions, and its upper surface was unhewn rock crystal with no steps leading up to it. Fifth, the Egyptian priesthood had dietary prohibitions and ritual ablutions very similar to Judaism. Orthodox Jews wear long curly side locks of hair. This same fashion denoted the high priest of Heliopolis, with side locks, wearer of On. The tabernacle of the Jews and the Temple of Solomon were oriented toward the east. All the temples of Amarna, Akhenaten's royal city, faced east toward the rising sun. Number 8, circumcision was an early Egyptian custom. 9, royal symbols of the early Israelite kings included the scarab beetle and the winged sun disk. From Tutmosis through Uya, the Ramesside pharaohs had the long aquiline nose, typical of the Jewish race. Manetho, this is the last, 11, accused the Hyksos people of desecrating the Egyptian temples by roasting sacred animals in them, which implies the custom of burnt offering was alien to Egypt. Burnt offerings on an altar were central to the Israelite religions, and it was just as it was to the Hyksos. The second and smaller Exodus is a long and complex story. Let it suffice to be said that the Egyptian history repeated itself, and the Aryans, the worshippers of Taurus, were bribed and convinced to leave Egypt once more. Unlike the first hasty big Exodus, this was an organized and much smaller Exodus. Yeah, Aryans were the followers of the sheep. After their departure, almost every statue and cartouche of Akhenaten was destroyed or defaced. Ellis goes on to contend that the greatest of the early leaders of history, of historic Israel, King David and his son King Solomon, were actually Hyksos Egyptian pharaohs, Lower Egypt. Keep in mind that the delta of the Nile, the cities of Avaris and Heliopolis are considerably closer to Israel than to Thebes in Upper Egypt. In fact, the Nile Delta was called by many other names than that of Egypt. It's possible, even likely, that they ruled from near the delta town called Tanis, which has been totally obliterated. Ellis has published separate books which go on into much more detail about the Exodus, Solomon, and locating Eden in Egypt. The final book in the series is Scota, Egyptian Queen of the Scots, which describes an even later exodus from the Lower Egypt area. In short, this story is of a pharaoh called Gathalos and his queen Scota, who were allowed to assemble a small fleet and peacefully depart with their followers and their riches into the Mediterranean Sea. They landed on the eastern coast of Spain, and their son, who succeeded them, was called Hiber, Hiber. He, or possibly his descendants, led a group looking for a safer place to live in the north. Eventually, they settled in the south of Ireland, followed the coast up straight north. They called this new land Hibernia in honor of the son of Gathalos and Scota, Hiber. Being attacked and constantly forced to defend themselves, they moved to the north of the island, Ireland, and enjoyed generations of peace. Some of them eventually moved across the short stretch of the Irish Sea and settled in what is now called Scotland, named in honor of the Queen Scota, the queen mother of them all. One of the things which Ellis pointed out in his book is the very interesting towers in the Irish mountains in Wicklow. I've actually seen those towers myself and wondered why they were built in such a remote place and by whom. I was told that they were built by hermit monks for their protection in being able to detect intruders at a distance. This simple answer bothered me, making little sense. Hermit monks, for one thing, would not be an attractive target to attack, having no valuables and only small flocks. Should they take refuge in the towers, their flocks would still be vulnerable, requiring a ladder to enter those towers. Surely the attackers could easily have assembled ladders from all the trees that surround the towers. And in fact, the trees would prevent the intruders seeing from a great distance. So it doesn't make any sense. Ralph Ellis points out that these enigmatic towers were built precisely the same as the Ben towers found in the midst of the inner court of the temple at Heliopolis and other temples dedicated to the sun god in Lower Egypt. This is but another interesting link of European civilization to Egypt. It is thought that they used gnomon in the observation of the seasons by the shadows that they cast. It may be that these towers in Wicklow Mountains were also used as gnomons for that purpose. Although the Druids were said to be sun worshippers, they were actually astronomers and daily tracked the position of the sun at sunrise. Needless to say, Ellis has come up with some astonishing claims through his extensive research, and I find most of his references and speculations to be based on some compelling evidence. This makes me wonder why scholars have not noticed these things in the past. Ralph Ellis to your reading list. That's my favorite.
Well, thank you very much, Don.
Any questions? I'm sure there are a lot of them.
Yeah, please remember, if you have any questions, everybody's currently on mute. So if you do have a question, make sure you unmute yourself so we can all hear you. Otherwise, you're just going to be talking to yourself.
We do that a lot.
Yeah.
Especially lately.
No questions, really? Come on, people. You're getting a lot of well dones in the chat, Don.
Come on, Jeremy, you got to have a question. Get up there, buddy.
Jeremy always has questions. Oh, Joe has a question.
Okay, I got a comment. Got a comment. That is, there were all kinds of permutations you can do if you put on in all the different political divisions in the Chaldees and Canaan and Egypt, upper and lower, and you can just take them like a deck of cards and mix them together and put yourself together 50 zillion different histories. So why this one? I've read lots of them, clear back to Moses and monotheism by Freud and others of such ilk that you see on the so-called History Channel.
Yeah, Ellis is not part of that. He has taken these ancient religious books, and he says if you got the Bible plus the Kebra Nagast plus the Jewish Tanakh plus the writings of Manetho and the Egyptian historian, if all of these agree, then you got to sort of accept that as probably historical fact. And I agree with him on that. I think that's
well. There's a thing in archaeology that goes along with this. You find you have maximalists and minimalists. The maximalists want to make everything correspond, and the minimalists want to make everything different. And you have to kind of pick and choose which ideology you're going to embrace once you start to interpret something that complex. Jeremy, I bet, has something to say about that. I've read the books, haven't you?
You know, Ellis had said that you take a look at the history here. He contends that no archaeologist has ever come up with the hard evidence that Solomon or David ever existed. That's
well, you should have read the last couple of issues of BAR, the Biblical Archaeology Review. Yeah, they have found some references to David, just with
references, but no evidence. Certainly no burial.
Evidence being his name on a stone.
Yeah, that's
at the temple site.
Yeah, no, that's
pretty good evidence, it seems to me.
It's not very.
Well, then you're a hard guy to please. Then.
Oh no, as great as these patriarchs are, in just a couple of little things there. So what Ellis says is they're looking in the wrong place. He thinks they're buried at Tanis, that they ruled from Tanis, from the margin of Lower Egypt there. Tanis is probably not even a 2-hour walk to Gaza. So
yeah, well, Simca, what's his name, the naked archaeologist, thinks they're buried somewhere over in Saudi Arabia. So
I doubt that. That's too far away.
Well, I say, who says? I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Don.
Give
That
me
was
one of
great.
those, I'll give you 35 other opinions.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and David brings up a good point. Like, how are we going to like separate truth from fiction these days? There's so many different theories out there, and everybody's got their shtick nowadays. And so it's very difficult, you know. And some people have become, what is it, sort of jaded, or what's the other word for it? I don't know. But, you know, so it's hard. So how did you come to feel that this line of sort of interpretation was right for you, for example?
Well, it's right for me because, again, Ellis takes the Tanakh, the Kebra Nagast, the writings of Josephus, Manetho, and the Quran. He says where all of these agree, then you can bet that's true history. And I
But
think
JED and P, just in the Torah itself, the 4 documents don't even agree with each other.
that's true. They don't in every case, but where they do agree, that's reliable history.
Well, then you're just stating your ideology. That's
And I have an actual question and not a critique. Can I go next?
Yeah,
Are
go
you in
ahead, Joe.
Egypt?
Thank you. So yeah, I have a real question for you, Don. Number one, great job, and thank you for doing this, because Kevin and I were actually busy working at Esotericon, so we didn't actually get to hear this paper last year. So thank you for doing this again. My question is, does Ralph Ellis talk about when he's talking about things during the Taurian age and then the Aryan age? Does he talk anything about the Jews, it being common to worship Taurian idols? You know, like when Moses comes down after getting the 10 Commandments and they build that bull, you know, it looks like a big shocker in the Bible, but that was actually the astrological age when that would have occurred. So it wasn't a really uncommon thing.
No,
He just
actually,
got pissed off by it.
that's not the astrological age when that would have occurred with the bull. It was actually, yeah, and they were reverting back to the bull because they were thinking, oh shit, man, Moses led us out in the desert to die. Let's worship the bull and everything will be all right. So,
Cool, thank you.
yep. Anybody else? Way in there, Jeremy.
We've got Tim, and then looks like James.
Can you hear me?
Has one too.
Hey.
Oh, all right, go ahead, James, and then Tim will hit you up next. All right.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. I didn't know if it was working.
Go ahead.
Who, me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I just jumped into this. Scott Schwartzberg sent me the link, so howdy, y'all. Are all
all
of
the
you
good
guys?
stuff, man.
Are you guys all traveling, man?
Yes, we are.
The whole group?
No.
Oh, okay.
Who's not?
Aha. Okay. Who's the moderator?
Kevin.
Kevin. Where are you, Kevin? Kevin.
I'm right here. Hello.
Oh, hey, Kevin. Hey. Okay, so I have a question for Jeremy. I'm sorry, I only know a few of you. Jeremy, are you Hasidic, or what is your story?
Oh, I have no story. Sorry. This is deceptive.
He's
I'm
unrelated.
just Jeremy with a black hat on.
Oh,
Men in black.
No, there's no backstory like that.
oh, hold on one second. Let me start the story because I still have something to tell you.
Oh.
Okay, it's just that I, in life, you know, unless you're in certain circles, there's certain conversations that you never get to have. And one of them would be with an Hasidic, because I pick their brain apart in a million ways. You know, so, and I didn't really catch much of what you guys were just talking about, but the golden calf. Now, I've read a lot about that. It's philosophical, or it's based in some sort of reality, or it's 100% based in reality. There's basically those 3 schools of thought, right? So, where were you guys at in that whole thing?
Well, when they saw the calf, they said, some bull. As in Apis bull? Sorry.
I don't know. I thought maybe I was jumping in some great,
No.
deep metaphysical
No.
secret or
You
something.
are actually. You are.
Early on in Egypt, the heliacal rising of the sun at the vernal equinox was into Taurus, the constellation Taurus. They worshiped the Apis bull, the holy bull. It was later on in the time of Abraham and beyond that the heliacal rising was in Aries, which is the sheep, the lamb. And there are all kinds of ramifications for that lamb.
Well, I got a question for you. This I want to say this before I forget it again, but we're coming upon Passover now soon, right? On Wednesday, I
Right,
believe.
right.
You know? I'm not like a practicing Jew or anything like that, but and you're talking about the Passover they used to use the lamb's blood in the
Right.
time of Aries. So now we're in the time of Pisces, right? Theoretically, I guess there's some debate maybe there, but and we're dealing with COVID. Thoughts? Fish oil on the doorway or what?
I'm painting my.
I think the Pisces was supposed to be the fish, as Christians use the fish, and now we're Aquarius. But I mean,
Yeah, that was in the era of Jesus. So yeah, Pisces. Yeah.
So Don, I have a question for you. So this is Mary. So you mentioned something really great that you said, like if the stories from the Quran, the Bible, and all of the above, they meet
Right.
together, that means this is true story. But also you mentioned that the lineage of like of how Joseph was chosen and he's not the oldest, and because of his mom, the stories of that from the book says that he was chosen because of the dream that he had.
No, that's a cover story.
Okay.
The Jews really hate to be identified with the Egyptians. To think that they descended from even the lower Egyptians is like totally horrible. In fact, there, as I said in the paper here, the idea of the slaughter of the holy innocents, that's going to be males under the age of 2. That doesn't escape too much notice, and it's only recorded in the Bible. And that's the cover story that Jesus and his family were sent back to Egypt to train him at Heliopolis to become the next pharaoh.
and then he went on to the Himalayas from there. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, there's a whole history in India. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
That was meant to be a joke. Sorry.
No, it's not a joke. I mean, there's a history there, and a lot of people follow that. I sort of think that the account in the Bible makes the belief of sending him down to Heliopolis for training makes more sense, and that the Jews really don't want to admit any association with the Egyptians.
Well, as young as he was at the time, I don't see how he learned too much between the ages of 3 and 6.
No, who knows what were his teen years? They're not even recorded anywhere.
Well, I mean, I want to add something to it. Like,
yeah, his teen years were in Nazareth because they went to the temple at 12 and went back home to Nazareth. So his teen years were definitely not.
Who knows that they could have gone back and forth? That's not that far.
Yeah, they may have spent their winters in Florida like I do.
David, Maddie, go ahead and ask.
Yeah. So Don, like, if we take the theory that Jews, they want to be related as Jews, and we look at the history throughout the whole history, how it's related. I mean, there is a time online, and this is where the discrepancy come in history from different historians. I mean, if you look at we call them the Western and Eastern historians, they look at history differently. And some of them, they see the Jews, the word Jew started in the ages of like the Jews religion, where the Abrahamics were before then. So the Israelites are not all Jews, and are you saying the whole concept of Israelites, they should not be related to the Pharaohs, or just the Jews from the Jews lineage down forward?
Basically, it's the royal families. The royal families were it. And if you look in the Bible, Jesus' lineage is recorded in 2 different Gospels. And one is his mother's lineage, that he's royal, and one is his father's lineage, that he's royal. Now that's very, very interesting. So if this is truly the case, he truly was royal. He wasn't a peasant. He wasn't a carpenter's son. That doesn't happen in royal lineage. So
I think the standard right now is that, yes, that's the case. High priestly families that have been kicked out. That's why he had such a trouble with the temple. He didn't want anything to do with it because his family got kicked out.
but if he was a Nazarite, he would have trouble with the temple for very definite religious reasons and not
Or
because
yeah, or perhaps because he had difficult with the temple, he
Yeah.
became a Nazarite, and probably an Essene, because the Essenes were part of that same exile.
Essenes were Nazarites, yeah, they were.
David, can we please, let other
I'll
people
back
ask
off.
questions here? Tim, Solomon,
Go for it, David.
I'll back off, man. Man, I love what you're doing. I'm just giving you trouble. I'll back off.
Hey, Don, great presentation.
Oh, hey, Tim, how you doing?
I Druids. Are there other connections that you identified between the main narrative and things that were happening in Western Europe at that same time? That
Well, it's interesting you mention that because I'm working on another author that, because I read the books of Ralph Ellis, which I got through Amazon, they will send you suggestions for things that you might like to read. And I got a book from an Irish author up in the northwest of Ireland, and McClintock is his name. And Chris wrote some very interesting stuff. One of his books, which I've read 2 of his books so far, and I plan to present that at the next Esotericon if we ever have it happen. But the contention of McClintock is that St. Columba, who's second only to St. Patrick in Ireland, St. Columba was actually, he says he's the last Druid. And he was a Druid who was converting, he could see the future, and he's converting people to Christianity at the time. But the Christianity in Ireland at early stages was not anything like the Christianity in the rest of the world. If you look at the Celtic crosses, absolutely none of them depict the crucifixion. Here's a symbol of the crucifixion, but none of them depict the actual crucifixion. There are no crucifixes in the early Irish churches at all. So that's sort of an interesting thing to think about.
Well,
Chris McClintock, in one of his books, there's a pilgrimage in Donegal in the northwest of Ireland. There's a cross that has a hole drilled through the transept of that cross. And if you look through that, you see the side of a hill, a slope. And there are 2 very prominent features, square stones, sticking out from the side of that hill. And one of them happens to, the sun sets right smack on that at the equinox. Or, I'm sorry, at the solstice. At the solstice, it sets on one, and at the other one, it sets exactly in June at St. Columba's birthday. Now, that's a little more than coincidence, and it is a pilgrimage route for those who venerate St. Columba. So, at Columba, it's funny that the area where he settled, it's called Glen Columkill. Glen, everybody knows what a glen is, but Colum was the Gaelic name for Columba, and Kill means church in Gaelic. So it's the Glen of Columba's church. Discovered that the solstices, that the shadows cast by the sun are at a perfect right angle. Perfect right angle. And there's only a few places around the globe that you'll see that perfect right angle. And they actually go through Iona, which is where Columba retired to Scotland before he died. and then farther over to Rosslyn Chapel. It's in that perfect square, as he calls it, where the sun casts that shadow in a perfect square. So it's within less than a degree of difference. It's the only place on earth that happens. And because of the variations of elevations and things like that, it's not perfect, but it's as close to perfect square as you're going to get anywhere on the globe.
He has a new book coming out shortly, too.
Yeah, he's working on it. In fact, I subscribe to that. If you go to the website, irishfreemasonry.com, you can see his books. He self-publishes, so you can only get them through that, but they will accept credit cards over the internet, and you can get the book shipped to you. So I highly recommend it. Very good reading.
I brought him over as a guest speaker, and I'm hoping to do so again in the future.
Yeah, I'm thinking if we can get him over for the Esotericon next year, that would be fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks, Don. I'm looking forward to that presentation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was supposed to be in Ireland April 2nd, and tomorrow is the day of my Irish Lodge's installation, big event, and of course that had to all be canceled. But Chris had very kindly invited me to come up and see him. He said he would put me up for 2 nights at his house, take me over to Donegal and show me all these sites over in Donegal. And so I am just so friggin' disappointed that I didn't get to go over there this year. It's amazing. But if we could get Chris to come over, that would be almost as good.
Were you going to spend some time with Ken?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I spent at least a week there with those guys. So, and of course, my lodge meets at the Grand Lodge in Dublin. So,
you gotta get Ken back over here.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's willing.
Oh.
He's willing.
Hey, Brother Don.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Randy.
My name's Randy Sanders. I met you at Mid-Atlantic Esotericon, and I didn't get a chance much to speak with you, and I regret that.
I thought you were mad at me or something. I don't know.
No, not anything of the sort. I was fortunate enough not to live off of the History Channel, but actually take a class in Egyptology from a archaeologist who spent boots on the ground time there for quite a while. And I see a lot more parallels than maybe even what you had presented. Did you have intention of taking this to the next level?
Well, there are a lot more parallels. In fact, it's interesting that if you've read Knight and Lomas, which I think everybody has, but Knight and Lomas in their hierarchy suggests that our Masonic rituals originated out of the initiatory rituals in ancient Egypt. That's their suggestion. I think that's probably the case because now I see Ellis's connection with the with Egypt, and if you look at Pythagoras, I was very interested. Our Master Mason lecture talks about the travels of Pythagoras, and he was initiated into several orders of priesthood and raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason. Where the hell did that come from? I mean, why is that even there? I never understood that. But then I got a book. It's a very old book, first century, by Iamblichus. It's a biography, a history of Pythagoras. And sure enough, Pythagoras came out of Greece, and he did travel to Egypt. He did get orders of priesthood there. But the interesting thing is the Jews are now in Babylon in captivity. Now it's all the intelligentsia, it's the royal families and it's the priestly families that were taken to Egypt. It was a brain robbery. It's interesting to see that Babylon would do that. Well, the Jews who remained back in Canaan, the lesser intelligent ones, refused to pay tribute. And they even made a pact with Egypt to protect them. Well, when the Babylonians found about it, they came back and they are wanting to kick ass. And they go down to Egypt and they take all of the priests and the royal families, and they take them into Babylon, into captivity. And this is the recording of that first century Iamblichus book. So here is Pythagoras in Babylon, in captivity, with the Jews in captivity, who apparently have ancient rituals that they got from the Egyptians. It makes sense that our ritual in Freemasonry originated in Egypt, and it was transmitted to Pythagoras, and it's reported in our ritual. That's, to me, fascinating. I think it's great. Okay, start throwing rocks, guys.
No, thank you for that.
So I'm sorry, this is Matt Parker. I do have a question. We were talking about the Nazarites, Jesus going up into Nazareth, but if I'm not mistaken, the actual city of Nazareth was not founded until 200 years
Absolutely.
after.
Nazareth and Nazarites have nothing to do with each other.
Okay, can you clarify that? Because I think that's
the Nazarites are a sect in Judaism that was very extreme to be totally faithful to the Torah. And they were also called the Sons of Light. Very interesting. The rituals at Qumran is that they would go out in the morning and they would all face the rising sun in the east coming up over the Dead Sea there. And I've actually been to Qumran and seen that. And it's stunning. And for them to be worshiping not the sun, but the power behind the sun. This was Akhenaten. Akhenaten had one god, and it was the sun god. But it wasn't the sun itself. The sun was the symbol. It was the power behind that sun. And that got Akhenaten into a lot of trouble, because all these other gods and all these priests who had a nice business going with these other gods were put out of business.
Thank you.
Hey, Don, when you say the power behind the sun, are you referring to Sirius?
Well, who knows? You know,
Who knows?
the energy of the sun gives us all life. We'd be dead without it.
Right.
So.
That's right.
You give me a hard time, Jeremy.
Matt, did you have a follow-up question for Don? I thought I saw you getting ready to ask something else.
No, but I can come up with one. Actually, so, yeah, Don. I mean, since Kevin, so generously handed it over to me, maybe you can clarify this. I've heard this. I don't know this true or not, but the word Nazarite and referring to Jesus of Nazareth comes from the Arabic word Nazarini, meaning a school of little fish. And it would have referred to himself and his followers as like a school of little fish, floating around the Holy Land.
Could be. I hadn't heard that interpretation, but it would make sense. And again, the idea of Nazareth, no, forget Nazareth. That's I think the spin of the Christian church. There's another theory that Ralph Ellis came up with, and that is that Josephus, I didn't get into this, but Josephus and St. Paul or Saul are one and the same person. Because if you look at when and where he traveled, the same thing is true with Josephus. Josephus wrote histories. He supported himself very nicely by writing and selling these histories of the early Jews. And he happened to be traveling in when he was writing all his letters. So Paul crafted, now here he was probably close to being a Nazarite, but here's Paul. He is trying to build a church, and he wants to appeal not just to the Jews, that's a very small population. He wants to appeal to all of the Gentiles. And if you're going to appeal to the Gentiles, you better make it sort of comparable to the religions going on, the pagan religions going on at the time. And so if you take a look at Mithra, that was probably the most popular Roman religion at the time of Jesus. And Mithra was born of a virgin on December 25th. He was slain and rose from the dead the third day. Coincidence? Makes you really, really wonder about that. Really wonder. And this makes it acceptable to the pagans, because if Jesus was born of a virgin on the 25th and died and resurrected on the third day, oh well.
And a quick correction over there, Nazarite in Arabic, it translates to actually great victory. That's what it stands for.
Oh, very good. I like that one better.
Hey, if no one's going out, I got another. Oh, sorry, somebody.
Yeah, I think Scott. Did you have another question? I saw it pinged. Move over to you.
No. I'm typing.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Jeremy, go
Well,
ahead.
I was just saying, Samson and Samuel were the probably the most famous Nazarites in the Bible.
I think the idea of Jesus being called a Nazarene, it was sort of a spin, the Christian church, early Christian church spin. If you read the history of the Council of Nicaea, 325, you see where the church was totally hijacked by the Pauline line. And those who were followers of Jesus' original teaching were considered heretics and killed or suppressed, at least. And that was a shame. You always wonder, what really did Jesus teach? We have a certain amount of that in the Bible, but not very much. And he keeps alluding to this isn't for the masses, but privately he would give his teaching to his disciples. So what was that teaching that was reserved for the chosen few?
You're getting into some Bart Ehrman territory.
Most of it's actually there. Most of it's actually there if you read his parables right after it, the esoteric meaning will be given to you. Like
in some cases, yes. But what other stories were there that we don't have, that were never recorded?
Hey,
the Christian church
who can answer that?
Suppressed that, you know? Yeah, it's no doubt in my mind that the Christian church
I think suppress is hopeful on your part. You know, I think they tried to save every scrap they could find, including ones that were definitely not so.
They very carefully decided what would be published, and they killed the people who did not agree. If you look at the Council of Nicaea,
there are other interpretations of that council, but I've talked too much.
Look at the Council of Nicaea. It was called by Constantine. Constantine called it, and he did not give the bishops a choice.
But Constantine lost.
No,
he was on the losing side.
He did not lose.
He was a good guy and went ahead with the bishops,
David,
even though
let's keep our emotions.
He was an Arian.
Listen, Constantine called the bishops together and said, if you don't come, you will be exiled. So you either come or you get punished. Now,
well, actually, I think he locked them up until they made a decision. I think
when they did come, he said, I really don't give a shit what you guys believe, but you are all going to believe the same thing. You're going to sign on to the same thing, or you'll get exiled. And you're going to believe the same thing everywhere in my kingdom, because what your conflicts are being disruptive, and it's not good for my politics.
Which is different than Constantine telling them what to believe, QED.
Oh, he didn't. He never told them what to believe. He didn't care what they believed. He just wanted them to believe the same thing. That's when the Paulines hijacked the church. Yep.
Hey, Don, real quick, I want to go back to like when we were talking about the royal blood and the royal lineage. Right. And I want to go back to that question. And the question I want to go back to it is, for you in your paper, what does it mean royalty? Like, because, you know, royalty can mean different things. So
Well,
what does it mean to you?
Oh, can I add to that? Because my question was the same, but I want to add a nuance so we could kill two birds with one stone. Is that cool, Kevin?
I don't like killing birds, but go ahead.
Feeding two birds with one grain.
There you
Yeah, royalty.
I'm cool with that.
Yeah, me and Marty have the same question. So royalty, yeah, what's your definition of royalty? And in particular, like, I had put a nuance about, like, for me anyway, it's like I think of it as a perfect combination of the priest and the king, right?
Well,
Plato
not
is
necessarily.
philosopher king. I mean, no, but I just throw that out there. I'd love to hear your response.
The ancients were very obsessed with royal lineage,
Right.
and it was what do you call it? Matrilineal. It went through the mother. So, and that's still the case with the Jewish religion. You're not considered a Jew unless your mother was a Jew. So
Exactly.
you'd only be half a Jew if your mother wasn't a Jew. So the matrilineal and the whole idea that Joseph was the son of a late in life wife of Jacob. Joseph was the eldest son of his mother, and that's what made him the one who would eventually rule in Egypt. So that's the Hebrew way.
Can I say something, please?
Please do. Go ahead.
The beginning of the session, somebody asked Brother Don. First, sorry, I'm Brother Hadi, Lebanon Lodge number 10 in the Grand Lodge of New York, and currently in the Middle East on a contract. So it's 3:30 in the morning. Somebody mentioned before to Brother Don that he said something that is not, but this is not how it is mentioned in the Bible. Myself, I was in 2001, I was in the seminar and I studied the Catholic, this is my religion, so I studied the theology. Even during the theology, the priests that used to give us the courses, they used to confirm that yes, we know that most of the Bible is symbolic. Even St. Paul in one of his letters, I don't remember the reference, it was sent to one of his of the churches, and then he told them, and as you know that because this is symbolic. So this is symbolic. We had one of the brothers at one time made a beautiful presentation that if Jesus, let's say he's a carpenter, but why all his examples are about masonry and construction?
Yeah, he's a builder, not a carpenter, a builder.
Exactly. I work as a finance manager. When I speak, I give examples of numbers. Another guy who's in the military, he speaks about weapons. So why all his examples are in masonry and building? So yes, the Bible isn't 100% a history thing, but it is symbolic. Most of them were just for a certain case, and the disciples wanted to talk about it.
I think you're right. The whole idea of masonry is very symbolic, and it has to do with building. Now, could this then, to me, it would say that this could make the connection with ancient Egypt even more connected. I think that may be the source of all of our initiatory rites, is this whole idea of building. You build a character, you build a life, you build a soul, you build a spirit. It's all about building, working and building.
Don, thank you very much for everything. I'm going to bail out. Thanks for an amazing presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for coming, Mehdi. Have a good night, brother.
Thanks, everyone.
Any other questions out there?
Yeah, thanks, Don. Appreciate your time, bud.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Hey, David, what's that behind you there?
That's my castle up on the hill. So
Yeah, right. Okay, what is that, David?
you know, you guys are talking about kings. You do notice the last name, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I have to have a castle, and you know, it's a long story. But
in the military, you're King, comma David, right?
Well, actually, I was in the Army Corps of Engineers, so I used to wear castles on my shoulder.
I'm sorry.
I said when I was in the Army Corps of Engineers.
I heard you. I said I'm sorry, David.
Yeah.
I can't pass up a low joke like that.
All right. Any other questions out there? If not, we'll wrap this up and call it a night.
Hey, this has been good. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks,
No,
Don.
thank you very much, Don. Don, like I said at the beginning, Don, this was a bit selfish for me since I you know, at Esotericon last year, I had to kind of come and go for all the talks. So
Yeah, you missed all the good stuff, man.
I did. I did this a little selfish for myself so I could finally see your entire talk.
There you go.
Hey, I have one little question I just remembered. Don, you were saying
Oh.
the Egyptians and Masonry, you know, have connections and ritualistically perhaps, and in terms of, you know, the process. And I remember noting when I was in Cairo a few months back, in like the Egyptian Museum, and how many positions these statues in that look like what we think of as signs.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
But signs that I'm not that I don't identify as directly Freemasonic necessarily. Not, you know, maybe some of them kind of, but different kinds of things that I would see as signs.
Well, the Jews in ancient times, in their initiatory rituals, would wear aprons. There's another connection. So the Egyptians wore aprons. They wore kilts. It's just very interesting to see these similarities running through all of these things. So.
And by the way, Greg Volker should get the background award tonight, Kevin. I see him popping in with some amazing background.
Yeah, he's had some good ones tonight. I see he's in the back.
Pretty badass.
Yeah, Greg, what was the one after that? What was the second one?
Oh, the second one, that was a Moonraker base.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Batman.
That was okay. That was good. The first one, I like the one with the scythe right behind you. That was good. Any other questions out there? All right. No, Tim. No. Sorry. Haiti, we'll get to you in a second. Tim, no visits tonight. Sorry, brother. Like Greg said, you don't have the traveling gavel, so tough luck. Go ahead. I think we had another question coming in for Don.
Are you going to post the recording of the session somewhere? We can see it again.
Yes. So I have been recording this session. It will be posted to the Refracted Light YouTube page and Facebook. So expect that up sometime tomorrow. And everybody who wants to watch again, or anybody who missed out on it, check it out at one of those two places. But I have recorded this talk, and it will be shared so everybody can see it.
Yeah, and you're gonna share with everybody on here like the video before you put it online, right? So we can all give you edit comments, like from minute 4 to minute 4:20. I want that removed.
Yes.
Nice.
All right. All right. If there's no more questions, we will call it a night. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yep. Bye, guys.
Good night.
Thanks again.